flag. Justice peace. Protest the gang. On our voice. On our fight. On our deaths. On our rights. Ayy, ayy.
Justice peace. Beware the trouble. Justice peace. To uncover.
The heart of a man, the way of this land. Injustice for all was never the plan. Nah,
Never the plan.
it's never the plan.
Never the plan. Justice peace. For the 2.5 part. Justice peace. Let's talk smart. Justice peace. For the 2.5 part. Justice peace. Let's talk smart. Justice peace. Open and reverse. Justice peace. Decline each verse. Objection. Apathy. Agony. Atrophy. Lyrics of our liberty. Justice peace.
To raise the flag. Justice peace. Protest the gang. On our voice. On our fight. On our deaths. On our rights. Ayy, ayy.
Justice peace. Beware the trouble. Justice peace. To uncover.
The heart of a man, the way of this land. Injustice for all was never the plan. Nah,
Never the plan.
it's never the plan.
Never the plan. Justice peace. For the 2.5 part. Justice peace. Let's talk smart. Justice peace. For the 2.5 part. Justice peace. Let's talk smart.
Justice Beat is dedicated to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. The Justice Beat is where we discuss all things justice.
Thank you for tuning in to the 9th episode of the Justice Beat Talk Show's 4th season. Today's topic is sexual assault in prisons. Today's guests are Tara Graham and E. Bjorkman. Tara Graham is JDI's National Program Director based in its Washington, D.C. office. She provides training and technical assistance to correction agencies on preventing and responding to sexual abuse in detention. She has been working on the development and implementation of the Prison Rape Elimination Act standards for 15 years, including at the National PREA Resource Center. Her experience includes interviewing homelessness and runaway youth and incarcerated women about issues including drug abuse, sexual behaviors, and experience with physical and sexual violence. Previously, Tara served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanzania, working on HIV/AIDS prevention with an emphasis on women and youth. E. Bjorkman is the PREA Outreach Director at the NYSCASA. E. Bjorkman is the PREA Outreach Director at the NYSCASA. This is located on the unceded land of the Haudenosaunee Ganyan-Gaye people, also known as Albany, New York. NYSCASA's mission is to end all forms of sexual violence and exploitation, and to address the impact of sexual assault. At NYSCASA, E leads a project that brings services to incarcerated survivors of sexual violence. E provides technical assistance to community-based service providers, convenes PREA trainings, and responds to letters from incarcerated survivors seeking services. In supporting prevention work and the larger work of the coalition, E assists providers building relationships with corrections and has been advocating for survivors to address the systemic and root causes of sexual violence. In 2020, NYSCASA hosted a conference, Ending Violence Without Violence. E co-hosted trainings focused on core principles of restorative justice, transformative justice, community accountability, and other community-centered approaches to violence prevention and response, as well as the importance of building communities that can prevent sexual violence, respond to harm, and heal trauma.
sexual assault. My title there is the PREA Outreach Director. NYSCASA's mission, that's our shorthand there, is to end all forms of sexual and exploitation and to address the impacts of sexual assault. So while I'm there doing PREA work, basically any work that has to do with someone who's incarcerated and who's a survivor or connections to that kind of come my way. So more basically day to day, I'll do trainings for our rape crisis centers or community-based providers that talk to people who've had bad things like that happen to them. I'll also work with various corrections organizations, prisons, jails mostly, throughout the state. And every now and then I'll get some letters from people outside the state too.
Okay, great. You guys are doing tremendous work. I love it. All right, let's talk about the prevalence of sexual assault in various facility types: jails, prisons, immigration detention centers, juvenile. Do you all ever do any work with juveniles?
Absolutely.
Okay, and juveniles. So let's take a moment and look at those 4 facility types and tell me what's happening in those, the prevalence of sexual assault facilities.
So the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which was through the Department of Justice, does surveys, and they do two different kinds of surveys. They do those of people who are incarcerated. So these are self-reported surveys. And then they also do surveys of administrative records. So what people have officially reported and, you know, that those facilities then report out. So the last time that those numbers came out from juvenile facilities was back in the surveys were done in 2018. And the most recent data we have on prisons and jails is from 2012. But those surveys are being redone, and I hope that the data is available soon. But big picture, it's about, if you estimate it across the nation, so we estimate about 200,000 people are sexually abused behind bars each year. And that's in all various forms of confinement throughout the nation.
Okay. And that's in jails, that's jails and prisons?
And juvenile facilities.
And juvenile, all combined.
Absolutely, yeah. And that doesn't, that indicates the incidence, it doesn't indicate the prevalence. So it doesn't tell us how many times that they have been sexually abused, but data tells us that most people do experience sexual abuse more than once.
Okay.
Or those that are sexually abused, I should clarify that it does happen more than once.
E, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, Tara's right with all of the reports. There's kind of always a need to get more current data with people who are incarcerated. I also want to add that sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, those are some of the most underreported crimes as well, for a number of reasons, right? It's hard to report them. It's sometimes embarrassing to report them. And a lot of times people need some time to really figure out what happened to me and to have that sink in internally before they have the time to want to do something about it.
Right.
So it is a hard thing to try to measure, but those are some of the best things that we can do about it. It's estimated, I've seen about 65% of reports are not made, or incidences don't come to reports. So the majority of times where something happens, it's actually not reported, from what we've seen.
Yeah, and can I just piggyback on that, because I think that is very much what we see in the data, because I said there were those 2 reports, and there's tremendous discrepancy between what is in the official reports that facilities receive and what self-reports come out, that's where we get those estimates of the 200,000 per year.
Are you seeing, can you tell me the type of sexual assault? Like, is it peer inmate on inmate, correction inmate? What are we seeing?
Sure, absolutely. So in adult facilities, and this is looking at adult prisons and jails, the studies show that it's nearly, and this is of self-reports, that it's about equal in terms of staff perpetrated and perpetrated by other incarcerated individuals. In juvenile facilities, the picture is very different. And I think this one always stands out to people, and it should, right? That the majority of the sexual abuse that is committed in facilities with juveniles is committed by staff, and in particular committed by female staff.
And the victim could be either male or female if it's female staff.
That is correct.
Um, there, so would you say a power dynamic is at play there? In both instances, whether it's in the juvenile facility or the adult, is it a power dynamic no matter what the contact type is?
Absolutely. Sexual abuse is really rarely about someone's gratification and really vast majority about power, control, and trying to exert some dominance over someone else. So if you take that general thing and then you put on top of that all of the ways that being incarcerated removes support systems, removes someone's ability to decide what they're doing with their time, what they're doing with their body, all these things really compound when you have a whole institution or a facility that's built around things like that.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to that because I want to dig into whether or not staff, how they're trained, proper training. But I want to first introduce the audience to PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. So let's talk about what that is, what it's not. And again, because we focus on trying to put resources and information in the hands of family members and friends who often are left behind in that resource stream of information. And what I mean by that is a lot of times folks who do this work, we tend to preach to the choir, other colleagues, politicians, and the family members are sitting on the fringes, really not knowing how to navigate situations. And so I want to bring them up to speed about PREA so they can be fully informed. Okay?
Yeah,
so take
sure.
Take your time with that and break it down.
Yeah, sure. So how much time do you have? Because I could talk for a long time about PREA. So PREA stands
You know what we can always do? We can always come back and do a part 2.
Fair enough.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure. So PREA stands for the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It was federal legislation that was passed back in 2003. And if you can believe it, it was unanimous on both sides, all political parties. And when does that ever happen?
Right.
So I think that really says something.
Yeah, I happened to be in DC at the time when that happened. It was exciting, right? Yeah.
Very exciting, very exciting. And so when the legislation passed, it called for a number of things. One, it called for the creation of a federal commission. The writing, who was then charged with writing what we now call the PREA standards. It also created funding streams to help jurisdictions to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual abuse, and also about the surveys that we've talked about already. So it helped the formation of all of those things. I had the privilege of working with that federal commission for a number of years. And so what their job was is they held a number of public hearings. They heard from, professionals in the field of corrections, from academics, from survivors, from family members of incarcerated survivors. And, we learn what the challenges were and what these standards should and could become. I'll never forget the commission talking about if there should be optional standards, and the conversation around if anything was optional. There was such opposition to this idea initially that they thought people won't do anything that's optional. And if we really think that this will help prevent sexual abuse to end this public health crisis, then they need it to be mandatory.
Exactly.
So in 2009, the PREA Commission handed over their draft standards to the Department of Justice, and then the Department of Justice released the PREA standards, promulgated them, as they say, in 2012. And so what this meant is that now there was guidance and directive for all correctional facilities around the nation: Federal Bureau of Prisons, state prisons, jails, juvenile facilities, community confinement, and even police lockups. So there are different sets of standards for these different settings. Very, very similar, but slight nuances based on the kind of facility that they're addressing. And so I thought I'd just share a little bit about the intent of the standards and I've got them right here. They're dog-eared and coffee stained, what they intend to do. Right. So first and foremost, to keep people safe. That is the intent of the PREA standards. They require a zero tolerance for sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and also to keep survivors safe from their abusers,
Mhm.
providing multiple ways to report,
Mhm.
offering medical and mental health care,
Mhm.
increasing accountability, and providing providing survivors with access to victim services from rape crisis centers, such as, from people such as E.
Mhm.
I could tell you more about, because people often ask about compliance, and I wonder if that would be helpful for the audience to hear about.
Yeah, compliance on the end of the facility, right?
Correct.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be neat because you know what? In my experience, facilities always try to find workarounds, loopholes, right? So then their responsiveness is even sketchy. But go ahead, I want to hear. And
Okay,
I know they want to hear too. Okay, our audience wants to hear
sure.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. So at JDI, we like to talk about meaningful compliance, to really to do this right, to really keep people safe, to really end sexual abuse and sexual harassment. This can't just be checking the box in preparation for an audit. And there are PREA audits.
Bingo.
That it really is about culture change. And like we said before, culture change is hard. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of commitment, and it takes time. But above that, people say, well, what's the incentive to jurisdictions complying? The Federal Bureau of Prisons, there's mandatory compliance. For states, and this is going to get technical for a minute, but states that are, quote, under the governor's operational control. So typically this means state adult prisons, juvenile facilities, and in limited situations, there are states that also oversee their jails, but primarily it's adult prisons and state-run juvenile facilities. Each year the governor is required to submit a letter that says whether they are in compliance, they're working on it, so it's in progress, which is called an assurance, or no response at all. Unfortunately, there are still some states that aren't buying into this whole PREA thing. And in a lot of states, I would say the majority of states still say that they're working on it. And so what that means is that for states that don't say they're doing anything, they lose 5% of certain federal criminal justice funds. Okay. So that's sort of the carrot, if you will. For those jurisdictions that say they're working on it, those same 5% are now earmarked to help with coming into compliance.
Okay.
So it's a financial carrot.
Incentive, yeah.
A little bit of an incentive to help them with compliance measures.
The resistance. Talk about the resistance. And I mean, why can we not respect the dignity and humanity of another human being? Why do you have to be coached and prodded and provided with incentives to comply?
Oh my gosh. I know, I'm with you. Like, I wish I knew why this was so hard, right?
Right.
We do see a lot of homophobia, transphobia, sort of this idea that, unlike what JDI, where we say it doesn't matter what crime someone committed, they need to be treated with dignity and respect and kept safe. That is not always some of the staff that work in facilities don't necessarily have those same beliefs. And we certainly see, anyone can be at risk of sexual abuse, but there are certain populations of individuals that are at increased risk. People who have been sexually abused previously, someone who may have a mental or cognitive disability,
right,
or a physical disability. And especially we certainly hear from survivors who may suffer from a mental illness that they're just not believed.
Right.
So not only can they not report in a way that people trust or that they'll be believed, but I think it also sets an opportunity for perpetrators to take advantage of those individuals and commit sexual abuse.
Mhm.
And certainly individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual are at increased risk. And unfortunately, transgender individuals, specifically trans women who are housed in male facilities, are more than 8 times more likely than the general population to be sexually abused.
And so, okay, is that a good recap of the compliance piece or do you have some more pieces you want to
No,
add?
I think that kind of sums it up. I think the big takeaway too is that we know, that financial incentive is only for those facilities that are operated by the state. So local jails and the vast majority of people that interface with the criminal justice system are going to go through our local jail system. There is not that same financial incentive.
Okay.
They are not beholden to compliance in the same way as state-run facilities.
The reporting instrument, do you find that it's adequate? Does it ask the right questions, enough questions?
I'll let E talk since I've been talking.
You know why I asked that question? Because I'm also thinking about around that same time, there was the Death in Custody Reporting Act. And we could hardly get folks to put the right kind of questions on the instrument, because you needed to really have information that was substantive enough to make changes, right? And that's why it made me think about that piece in relation to the reporting around the sexual assaults. Are we getting information that's meaningful?
That's an excellent question there, Elaine. I can't answer as broadly as maybe a national thing. In New York State, the office that funds this work is the Office of Victim Services. And I'm sorry, I'm going to do technical things here too. They get their form from a federal branch of the government, the Office of Victims of Crime. And that form has been around and has been around for before PREA. It wasn't really made to capture all the nuances of what happens in incarcerated settings. So in my experience, there's not specifically a form that was built for this population to capture all these things. So because of that, the reporting doesn't have absolutely everything on it, but reporting can mean a lot of different things, right? So the reporting I'm talking about is from the numbers that a service provider will do, right? Those are more of a grant kind of reporting, but reporting for someone who's incarcerated saying, hey, this just happened to me, is an entirely different process. What happens there in New York is that there's been tried to build as wide of a net as possible. So if someone who's in a prison in New York says, who can I report a PREA situation to? The answer on paper is anybody. Anyone who works at that facility or goes into that facility has been trained and should know exactly what to do when they hear, hey, I've got a PREA situation going on.
Okay.
More practically, there's not everyone at the facility that someone says, I want to talk to that person about it, right? Usually there's someone that says, I know who I feel a little bit more safe around. And so there'll be someone that gets more reports than others. And that's a whole other conversation there, right? So yeah, there's so many moving parts to the PREA work. There's the prisoner jail staff.
Right.
There's a service provider that doesn't work for the prisoner jail that's coming in or is contacting someone who's there. And then there's the survivor themselves. So there's always at least 3 parties involved in trying to work through, setting up a meeting or what's happened to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add a little bit to that? Because I think to help, especially individuals who may have family members that are incarcerated, like he was saying, the net should be quite, broad and wide in terms of how a report can be made to staff. There's always someone that is designated at the facility to oversee PREA implementation. Unfortunately, it may be an add-on to an already full-time job, but in some places it is a full-time job. But they can also, write it on a slip of paper, submit it on a medical form, file a grievance. There should also be an option. A lot of places have hotlines where someone can call, and they may not speak to a live person, but maybe they can leave a message, and that is an official report. They also have to have, facilities need to have an ability, and they call it an external reporting option, so that there is at least one way that if I'm incarcerated, I can contact this external body. It's separate from the prison or jail, and make a report. And that person, like that agreement has been worked out, that they are then obligated to forward that report to the facility. People can remain anonymous when they report. And there's also the option for family and loved ones and friends to make a report or a third party report. And facilities are supposed to make publicly available, hopefully on a website, a phone number or a form or some way that a third party can report on behalf of someone who's incarcerated.
Yeah, I do recall seeing it, at least here in Missouri, on the front page of DOC's website. I believe it's the front page. There's like a box that says, PREA coordinator, blah, blah, blah. So it appears to be pretty prevalent on that page.
Yeah, and that's great to hear that it's on the front page. Unfortunately, I do see that sometimes it's buried.
They bury it.
It's really buried. And, I can't imagine, like I'm doing this for my job. I can't imagine as someone whose family or loved one is in a state of crisis. Now you are, and you're trying to give them support, to try to have to find that is incredibly frustrating.
You mentioned grievances, and I would imagine advising or suggesting to someone that is incarcerated to file a grievance regarding not even imagine, I know firsthand from the work that I do, they're often reluctant to file a grievance. A lot of times facilities will tell them, you need to file a grievance so we can look into this, and then there's like a 45-day window of the process steps you got to go through the regular jail system or prison system process for grievances. And a lot of inmates will back away from that because fear of retaliation, if it is correction on inmate, right? Even inmate on inmate. How do you get around the fear of retaliation? Even if they're told, okay, you don't have to go through our regular grievance process, you can directly go to the PREA coordinator, there's still some reluctancy to do that because everybody knows what they're doing. How do you, where's the confidentiality piece? How do you make this the same the anonymous way that the person who is a family member can submit? How can we translate something similar for the person who's incarcerated that does not want to have any retaliation or any experiences where someone finds out about them filing this report? That's a big issue.
It is. And I think that is, to me, one of the biggest takeaways of the very large act that is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, is that in there it says that there's a community-based rape crisis center or service provider that does not work for the prison or the jail, that someone can call and say, hey, this happened to me. And their confidentiality is the exact same. So if there's someone that, is in the community and says something happened to me, I would like to talk to someone about it, they're entitled to confidential services throughout all of New York State. It's like that in the vast majority of states. I can't speak for all of them.
But that's in the community.
Exactly. And so what PREA did is it says those same confidentiality standards that people have in the community are the same ones here.
Okay.
The Prison Rape Elimination Act was written for prisons and jails to do things a certain way, not for a responder to do things a certain way. They've got basically how they go about it with their confidentiality. So that's the important part, is that it brings in someone who doesn't work for a prison or a jail or investigator that doesn't have the same mandatory reporting as anyone else who works there. So someone can just call and say, hey, this happened to me and I don't feel comfortable making a report, but I want to talk to somebody about it. And that was not happening before the Prison Rape Elimination Act, at least not nearly as widespread.
So I'm thinking about the piece around monitored phone calls. Like, okay, I get that, but they monitor phone calls.
Well, so in the PREA standards, so like E said, they should be, access, whether it be phone or mailing or mailing addresses, both need to be provided in order to have that communication with a community-based support person, like a rape crisis center. Absolutely.
Right.
And so you're right that oftentimes.
And they read mail.
Well, hang on. So because, think about what E said about confidentiality. So,
okay.
Now it is a little bit tricky because what I have found is that in working with corrections and advocates is that they will use words like confidentiality. And it's one of those situations where people say, oh yeah, we're confidentiality, we're good. But what really needs to happen is to dig down to say, what do you actually mean by that? And to make, because oftentimes we're using that word, but we mean very different things. And so it's important to come together to figure out, balancing the care, custody, and control that corrections wants with the confidentiality that the rape crisis centers want. And that's a lot of the work that we do. And I know E does is working on those relationships to get it to a place where the mail is treated like legal mail, that the phones, a lot of times you're right, like the phones are like a bank of phones. And so not only, like the conversation, I'll get to like the monitoring piece in a minute, but like it's not private because I'm standing right next to someone else who's using the phone, who's standing next to someone else. I was actually just talking with an advocate or with a prison earlier this week. And I said, advocates, something it may be helpful is for advocates to understand the setup. I encourage tours, which may not be possible right now, but to understand the physical layout. And so that will help them to adapt their advocacy skills to best serve someone who's in a confinement setting, which may mean instead of having open-ended questions, that you ask more yes/no questions to kind of gauge someone's level of comfort with sharing more.
Okay.
And E is definitely the expert on this, so I'll let him talk about that more. But the other thing I want to just note is that, yes, I often have people say, corrections folks say, well, we have to monitor the phones because what if someone says something inappropriate? And it's like, but you know what? Advocates are trained to deal with those kinds of calls. That they get inappropriate kinds of calls in the community as well. And they know how to deal with those and how to shut those down. They know how to maintain their boundaries in their role as advocates. So it's all, and some people will say like, oh, well, our phone system won't let us do that. Well, that's not true. Technology is a wonderful thing. And in fact, especially, a lot of facilities, good, bad, or indifferent, contract with, national phone providers. And those phone providers, we have actually done this in a number of jurisdictions. They can absolutely program the phones. So when I call E for support services, that phone call is not monitored and it's not recorded.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that do you know if Securus has that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Securus has that
PPL.
contract.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oftentimes you just have to ask. They haven't asked their, if I'm the corrections facility, and I just think like that's how it has to be. Like they have to monitor all and record all the phone calls. I say, go talk with your rep. And if your rep doesn't know, go beyond them because they can absolutely do it. So those phone calls and also making sure that I don't have to enter my inmate PIN when I'm making a phone call.
Okay. Yeah, I'm taking notes here. There's a couple of things I hadn't thought about in that whole piece around the not using the inmate number and considering this as legal mail. And then also I would say, is there a way to make it go both ways? If they're calling a certain kind of facility or organization, that needs to be identified as a legal entity, a law firm or something. Is that possible?
That's what has happened in New York State here. So the Department of Corrections has their list of what qualifies as legal mail, and it's done by address. So you would send it to Department of Corrections central office. They would verify it and then push it out to the facilities that way. So the coalition here and our 10 different service providers throughout the state, those are all on the Department of Corrections radar for being able to have the legal form accepted. So that doesn't just solve all the problems, right? Some people actually prefer to not use legal mail. There's pluses and minuses. In New York State, legal mail does provide more protections, right? It can't be opened without the person being there. And also, if it is opened, it can't be read. It can just be like shaken out, making sure that nothing's in there that doesn't belong in there. But sometimes in New York, when you get legal mail, you have to sign on a piece of paper saying, like, I have received this mail. And so it does.
It's now been identified.
It can actually be more of a paper trail than regular mail. So we always tell people, just tell us what your preference is, right? It's as wide of a net as we can do here in New York. There are people that say like only legal mail. And then there are some people that say, no, that puts a flag on my mail. I want to use general population.
Okay.
Elaine, can I go back for a moment? You
Absolutely.
You asked a question about,
because we've got about 5 more minutes before we stop just to check for any questions. Okay. And then
sure, of course. I want to go back to the retaliation piece that you mentioned. And absolutely, that is of a concern.
Yeah.
And I'll speak from what the standards want to have happen. And that is that anyone who makes a report, whether it be staff, another incarcerated person, whether I'm making a report about something that happened to me or that I've observed, that all of those individuals are monitored for retaliation. That during the course of the investigation, until it's determined, if an investigation comes back saying it's unfounded, meaning there's no evidence to say that this happened at all, then the retaliation monitoring can cease. But at a minimum, people are supposed to be monitored for 90 days. And that can go on even longer, just to make sure that stuff isn't happening. So let's say, for example, I've heard stories of staff who've made reports about other staff being inappropriate and them having their shifts changed, having, stuff put in their staff locker, vandals into their cars, things like that. We also encourage facilities, when they're monitoring on an incarcerated person, looking to see if there is an increase in like disciplinary reports that they're receiving, or their housing is being changed, or changes to like programming or education, work assignments, things that may seem punitive in nature, maybe restrictions to their visitations. These are the kinds of things that can crop up if someone is being retaliated against.
That's good. That's good. Have you seen investigations go longer than 90 days?
Yes.
We have very few that are done in 90 days.
Very few are done in 90 days?
Yes.
I thought that was a short window.
It is. And I don't know about you, what it's like in New York, but what we see that is often and this is true even in the community, right? That crime labs are backed up, that the backlog on processing.
Okay.
If there is a sexual assault forensic exam that is conducted to collect evidence from the body, or any other kind of forensic evidence, that can take an extremely long time to process, really dragging out the investigation. I don't know what you're seeing in New York.
I'd say that's right. Not to go too far in, but New York City in New York has a lot of its own special regulations. So New York City actually has something that says investigations need to be completed within 90 days. There's a way that if folks need longer, that they can extend that. But that doesn't happen in the rest of New York State. So the majority of cases in upstate prisons take a lot longer than 90 days if are closed.
Okay. All right. What's the outcome of a lot of the investigations? What are you finding? Do they have merit?
The vast majority that we find are determined unfounded. So it doesn't mean that something did happen or that something didn't happen. That's almost 90% of the responses.
Or is it unsubstantiated? Because that's what we see. And nationwide,
you.
that's what it is. It's
Oh, okay, because you see my
unsubstantiated.
face. I'm like,
It's
okay.
No, and that's what we see across the nation. There's actually been some studies to kind of look at, to quantify what are the outcomes of investigations. And I think that that's I think it's tragic that those are the outcomes that we're seeing, that there's something is, a lot of times people will say, well, it's just, one person against another person, just there's no video or no other witnesses. And so that's why they end up in this gray area of unsubstantiated. But I think it's tragic that we should be able to get investigations to either substantiated or unfounded.
90% are unsubstantiated. 90%.
I'm going to get the terms mixed up, but whatever the one that means that not sure if something did or did not happen. Yeah.
That's what happened. Yeah, I don't know. I can't, I don't recall across the nation what the number is, but it's quite high. It may not
It's
be
definitely over 50 nationally.
Very, absolutely.
Okay, I'm okay.
So, but I think the other challenge is that for those that are substantiated, meaning that the act actually occurred, that then the challenge becomes prosecution. That it has been incredibly difficult to get prosecutors to take up cases.
Sure.
More likely to do it if staff are involved, but especially if it's two incarcerated individuals. Oftentimes it's not uncommon for those cases not to be prosecuted.
Yeah. And that plays into like the low reporting that we kind of started with, right? Like there's all the roadblocks that a normal survivor would have. And then there's so much overlap in like the way that people who are either sexually assaulted and then the way that people who are in prison are talked about, right? Like both groups of people can get told like, you should have done better. Like you deserve what happened. It's your fault. There's a lot of blaming of people that go on to both of those. And we combine them both within a facility that like brings people away from their environment. It can get really challenging and obvious roadblocks to disclosing, which is a Just Detention International graphic, actually. Like JDI does great work. There's a whole graphic on what are the roadblocks to disclosing for people who are in jail. And 52% of those people are afraid that the person who hurt them will find out. 43%
This is
thought
not
staff
encouraging.
wouldn't even investigate. Like almost 50% of people think nothing will even happen if they go about it. So
yeah,
roadblocks there.
Okay. Okay. I have to digest what was just said. It's disappointing. It is 10:45, and when we come back from checking on our audience and other folks for Q&A, I want to talk about resources, because you just mentioned about the roadblock graphic and other items that you may want to share with our audience and websites, etc. So let me check in, and we're at our 10:45 mark, and where we normally check in for Q&A, see if our audience members has any questions. Our moderators, please join us at this time.
I do have one fairly involved question from Facebook.
I can't see your face, Vito.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. My camera's not really
It's not working? Okay, all right. Okay.
My computer's been giving me all sorts of problems, but
Sure.
Someone who has a loved one in a Supermax facility in Ohio is asking what they can do if there are reports of sexual abuse, no access to any like PREA boxes or anything, and after complaining to the Ohio Department of Corrections, this person is claiming that her loved one was put in solitary and that contact with this loved one has been like totally cut off. And she's asking what can be done if all of these levels of complaints have been sort of rejected and there's no one for her to really go to on behalf of her loved one, and there's no way for this loved one to actually contact anybody except for if it's like attorney approved. So it sounds like this person just needs some help looking for next steps.
Tara E.
Tara, do you want to take that one? We're New
Yeah,
York.
sure.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a big one, and I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry for that individual. Yeah, because it doesn't matter where they are housed, they should still have access to all of these resources. And we do see that, someone who may make a report, they're supposed to, the perpetrator and the survivor are supposed to be separated from one another, but we do find that, and solitary or, confinement is sometimes used, and it should only be used as a last resort, but it often becomes very punitive. And so unfortunately, I've heard this kind of situation before. So a couple of thoughts, certainly, you can contact us at justattention.org. You can email us or write to us, and we could certainly send a packet to your loved one. It's treated as legal mail, and so we could get them a survivor packet. And we'll just provide some resources and supports to them while they're incarcerated. As a loved one, again, think back to what we were talking about, that third-party report, that there may be an option to contact at the Ohio Department of Corrections. And there may also be like an ombudsman's office, because an ombudsman's office or some other kind of government entity that you can reach out to complain about the treatment of the individual. This is a very challenging situation, and I wish I had, the magic solution, and unfortunately, I don't.
But the packet that you want to send, at least it's a start. And because it's considered legal mail, prayerfully it will get into this person's hands.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've sent a number of those packets myself. The packets that JDI sends out are some of the best resources out there. I wish I had more national resources. Just Attention International is really one of the best widespread national groups. There's also a great place called the PREA Resource Center. It's really a little bit more for the people that are working in those places than for survivors themselves. I would go to JDI myself. A lot of state coalitions like NYSCASA are doing PREA work, but not all of them. I would say if I would tell this person to ask their state coalition if they are doing PREA work. They may have some ins there, and it may also spark some change if there isn't.
Can I ask a question? How often, because I'm always looking for like backdoor ways and workarounds, how often do you all work alongside the PNAs? And I'm asking that for a reason. There's a PNA office.
PNA? Sorry.
The Protection and Advocacy Systems. I mentioned earlier the National Disability Rights Network when we were talking before. They were formerly known as the National Association of Protection and Advocacy Systems. There's a PNA office in every state designated by the governor. They are federally funded and congressionally mandated by Congress to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. And that includes jails and prisons and juvenile facilities, right? And, because there is a population of folks who are incarcerated that may have a disability as defined by the ADA,
right?
Collaboration with PNAs could be extremely beneficial because they have unprecedented access authority to go into these facilities. So someone like this gentleman that's in the solitary confinement, if this individual has some type of disability, whether it's physical, mental health, anything, it may prove beneficial to try to collaborate with the Ohio PNA office around getting access to this individual and getting inside that facility to see him or her. Okay.
Thank you for that, Elaine. I hadn't heard that. I learned something myself. That's excellent.
Oh, you know what? And it's weird because I spent so much time in the PNA at the state level and national. I just probably assume everybody kind of knows, right? Especially folks working in this space. And it's always, enlightening to know that a lot of folks are not aware. But that also says something to me. People should know about the PNA system because of that one major thing. They're designated by the governor in every state. and they have unprecedented access authority.
Hmm.
They can go into facilities when no other organization can get in.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
That
So-
is a fantastic collaboration
Yeah.
that I'm going to be going for. The
Yeah.
only thing that's like that in New York State that I've heard of is there's something called the Correctional Association of New York. It
Okay.
sounds very much like it would be a prisoner jail. It's actually a nonprofit. It's been around for over 100 years, and they can do walkthroughs as well. So that would be, I don't think there's one in every state, but at least in New York, that is another body. So I'm taking notes here too. Thank you.
Yeah, and see, the way you would want to trigger, the way the PNAs trigger that is you got to have that person, at least a family member or that individual that's impacted, reach out to the PNA with their issue or complaint, so they can also at least get a release of information to get access to your records. And once they're representing you, they are Johnny on the spot. So yeah, I mean, but it's got to be triggered by a phone call from a family member or the individual impacted. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm always encouraging folks to look, y'all. There are PNAs out here that can really, but the person's got to have a disability. Okay. Yeah, it's some type of disability. All right. Thank you so much for that question. Do we have any other questions coming in?
Not from Facebook, no.
Okay. All right. Nick, any questions?
My videos today too.
Okay.
But there we go. But we do not have any other questions on my end.
Okay.
Great question though that came
I know.
in.
Awesome.
I think a lot of ground.
Yeah. Okay. We got 5 minutes, and I said I wanted to leave the last 5 minutes for you guys to give resource information, how to reach out to your organizations, any events, activities coming up, and then we'll close out. Tara, I got it right that time.
Okay, sure. So again, you can contact us. We hear from family members, thousands of incarcerated survivors every year. Justdetention.org is our website. Two things I want to plug three things that I want to plug real quick. One, every year we do a campaign called Words of Hope, and we write, I think we're scheduled to send out about 26,000 holiday cards to incarcerated survivors around the nation, and they get a packet of cards. And I think it's going to be on November 30th. So right after Thanksgiving, there will be a way for people to submit messages of hope on our website. The other thing, we've launched a campaign called #Prisoners2. And this is in response to the Me Too movement, where people were able to give voice to the traumas the sexual abuse that they've experienced, but incarcerated survivors don't have that option, or incarcerated individuals at all. And so if you go to our website, you'll see it right on our homepage about #Prisoners2. It was this wildly successful, amazing program we did in 2 women's facilities in South Carolina. But there's a way for people to view a short video about that project and submit messages of hope to those individuals as well. And last but not least, I just want to say, we've talked a lot about mail and communication today. And what we're seeing across the nation is more and more jurisdictions going to a process of having mail shipped out or scanned, so people don't actually physically get the letters and cards and colored pages from their loved ones and children and that sorts of thing. So we have a mail campaign to try to put a stop to these practices, because we know how very important it is for people to maintain those friends and familial connections while they're incarcerated.
Okay, good. Have you heard of Flick Shop? Okay,
Yeah.
Marcus Bullock.
Yes, that sounds sort of familiar. Yes.
Yeah, okay, because y'all need to connect too on that. That's another way for family members to stay connected. Check out
Great.
Marcus Bullock, Bullock, and he has this new app called Flick Shop, FLIKSHOP, I believe it is.
Okay.
We interviewed him
Thank you.
last year, and it's a tremendous way. The campaigns that you have going on or coming up seems to me would be also a great way to also collaborate with him as well, to make
Great.
sure that family members have all kinds of options for staying in touch. Okay.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Big agreement. That's an excellent episode that y'all did last season, by the way.
Oh.
That flip shop episode, also good.
Thank you.
Yes. Everything that Tara said, and then also in New York, there is the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, which is a legal firm that helps protect incarcerated trans rights. There's the Prisoners' Rights Project, which is part of a legal aid society in New York City. I'll send you all email with the links here. Another place that is really leading some narratives is an organization called Survived and Punished. It talks about people who were arrested for defending themselves in a domestic violence situation.
Okay.
And there's Prison Policy Initiative, which is a bit more like statistics, but oh man, they've got so many great charts, so many great stats.
Yes. Very
They've
rich
got great
information
stuff there.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm sure that Vito and Nick are already on the job and typing this stuff in the chat areas and on Facebook or whatever, because they're always on top of it. But still, feel free to send us the information just to make sure we got it right. Okay.
Cool.
All right.
And then
And I
Go
would
ahead,
just
I'm
say
sorry.
that, and I would just say that I see my job as to help. And so it doesn't matter who that is, whether it be, corrections officials, incarcerated individuals, families, loved ones, reach out. Like, there's so many resources available, and sometimes it can be, I think it can be overwhelming to know where to start or where to begin. So I encourage people to reach out and would be more than happy to lend a hand.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. E, were you going to say something else?
the last thing I was going to say is that if you're in New York, you can go to NYSCASA's website, and that will show you both all of the survivor or all of the community member programs that we have who are serving prisons. And then it has all the rest of them in the state. So all of our 80 rape crisis counselors, you can talk to somebody no matter where you're at in New York State with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome resources and events coming up. We definitely have to do a part 2 because I didn't get to the part about what's happening to provide training on the inside for staff and holding them accountable for what they should know and how to play that out inside that setting. So we're going to have to do a part 2. All right. Thank you so much, Sarah and E. This is, oh my goodness, this has been great. Great information, great coverage. You guys are all these subject matter experts on this. And really, I believe that you provided our listening audience with a plethora of information that's going to be very beneficial for them. I want to thank the individual who submitted the question via Facebook regarding their loved one in Ohio. We are, I will definitely be keeping that individual in my prayers and thoughts, and be on the lookout for information from Tara regarding the survivors package, okay? I want to say thank you to our listening audience across social media for joining us for another installment of the Justice Beat Talk Show, where we talked about sexual assault in jails and prisons. Please join us on next Saturday for another installment of the Justice Beat Talk Show at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time via Facebook Live. I want to say a great appreciation to the production team here who helps us to come on live every Saturday. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And just everyone have a great rest of the weekend, and God bless.
Justice beats, always on reverse. Justice beats, decrying each verse. Objection, apathy, agony, atrophy. Lyrics are our liberty. Justice beats.
To raise a flag, justice peace, protest the gang, on our voice, on our fight, on our deaths, on our rights. Hey, hey.
Justice beats. We ready to trouble. Justice beats. To uncover.
The heart of a man, the way of this land. Injustice for all was never the plan. Nah,
Never the plan.
it's never the plan.
Never